Welcome to Spilling the Tea SA. I'm your host, Bianca. Today I'm chatting with Andrew Le Roux, a respected South African business leader and board member, and one of the original signatories of the Not in Our Name letter. If you're new to this topic, here's the quick backdrop. The Not in Our Name letter was written and signed by 40 plus Afrikaners in response to the way the Trump administration has tried and continues to use Afrikaners as a political talking point in American culture war debates. At the same time, there are certain organizations which have positioned themselves as the voice of Afrikaans South Africans, often pushing narratives that don't reflect the lived experiences of most people in South Africa. The letter pushed back firmly. It acknowledges that South Africans, Afrikaans and otherwise, face real shared challenges, but it makes it clear that no foreign agenda and no single organization gets to define what Afrikaners think, feel, or believe. The signatories spoke for themselves as Afrikaans South Africans, saying, "You don't get to use us, speak for us, or claim our identity for your own objectives." In this interview, Andrew explains why he signed the letter, what it represents, and why it matters. Grab your tea and let's dive in. Welcome, Andrew.
Hi, Bianca. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, and thank you for joining me. As I previously indicated to my audience, you are one of the original signatories of the Not in Our Name letter. And the first thing I wanted to ask is, what motivated you to sign the Not in My Name letter? What was the message that you felt you wanted to send out?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I was invited by a good friend of mine who, for a long time, we've sort of grappled together with South Africa's problems. So she knows that where my headspace is, and so when she got involved, she pulled me in as well. And it really is a case of there's a subsector of the Afrikaner community that's quite well organized, and so their voice gets heard. And that voice has now started having implications for the country because that voice has gone outside of the country. So when you see Donald Trump starting to make decisions based on a certain narrative, and that just doesn't ring true, then it just felt like we needed to get another voice out there. So that's why we started with Not in Our Name. That's really the focus. But it was about how this is being abused in the US specifically. That was where my head was at.
So it was a personal decision.
Absolutely, yeah. No, so nobody sort of put my name on without my knowledge or twisted my arm. It was absolutely. Trying to remember, I think I sort of got a copy on WhatsApp. I put it into Word and made some suggestions and track changes, sent that back. A couple of those came through. So I mean, I can show that I had a part in some of the minutiae of the letter, and looked at the final product and was just very happy to put my name down there.
Okay, the reason I'm asking you that is because there were a few articles that I noticed that said it was a kind of a psyop run by the government. And I needed you to confirm that, you weren't doing it under duress. Or a secret agent.
Look, we've all seen the series and the movies. You don't know how. I'm certainly don't have any experience in that world. What I can tell you is that I looked at the final product, and I, Andrew Le Roux, with great enthusiasm, put my name under that wording. So even if it were to have come from someplace, which I strongly believe it did not, that in the end, all of us needed to decide whether to put our name against that. I know a number of the people who've been involved in writing it. Obviously, that's one of the things that I looked at before I put my name down, as who else has put their name down. And certainly people who I've known for a long time. I know their track record. I know their commitment to South Africa. So for me, that's just been a red herring from the start, that whole thing, which I think was probably quite an orchestrated attempt to send us down a rabbit hole and detract from the core message that we've been trying to give.
I also found it rather strange because initially the problem was with the signatories, and then it all of a sudden wasn't the signatories, it was a government letter. But
Yeah.
let's move on.
Well, and sorry, just to add to that, Bianca, the notion that if the ANC likes it, then it must be the enemy. It's just sort of an age-old us and them thing. You're either 100% for us or you're the enemy. I had people who I then forwarded that to in order to get them to sign up on the website and add their names, who I got quite amazingly emotional responses from. And I think that's one of the problems, is that we sort of feel that we need to pick sides. And either you agree with everything I say or nothing. And that for me is just intellectually very unsatisfying. I want to apply my mind to all the issues. Everything that we have to deal with in terms of finding solutions for the country is very complex. So to sort of say, well, I'm going to take one package deal and then I'm not allowed to use my brain anymore is not a very exciting proposition. I'd rather apply my mind to all of the issues.
I agree. I agree. It's you either all in or all out is just strange for me. There should be some
Yeah.
room and flexibility for critical thinking.
Yeah. You can be an Afrikaner without liking Steve Hofmeyer's music.
True. Why do you think American right-wing figures are so fixated on South Africa? Just from your own, specifically on the certain narratives and I think it was mentioned in the letter around the great replacement theory. But the white genocide narratives, I mean, we have just recently had the boycott, the indication that the US is boycotting the G20 because of these atrocities in their head. They have been addressed several times. The facts don't fit the good story. So why do you think it is they're so fixated on that story and we don't seem to be able to shift the powers that be, the needle when it comes to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. If I was in the US, I would vote Democrat. I think that's pretty certain in my mind. So I've been observing the US politics for the last 15 years with a great amount of interest and often confusion. I don't get how a system which we've always thought of as the epitome of democracy and the land of the free and speak your mind, all that has become what it is today.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that has been driven by fear and stoking of fear on the one hand. And the other technique that's often used is kind of obfuscation by, if there's noise about one thing that you don't want to talk about, then you create a fire somewhere else. So you come up with these outrageous things that are actually not the thing. They're meant to just take the eye away from the thing that you don't want to talk about. So I think those are probably two of the dynamics that play themselves out repeatedly in the US. And specifically then how our story as Afrikaners, our 300-year story, I think pushes buttons. There's an element, I believe, so you asked me for my opinion, that there's an element of deep racism in that. White people who hearken after a time where white people made the decisions and based on the needs of white people. That is something, my own journey over the last 20, 30 years of learning about being a South African white guy is a whole other story. But I've just so come to appreciate the amazing value of inclusivity and diversity. I've learned so much from my Black friends who've patiently just told me their story and listened to mine. We've been able to talk. But I think a lot of people, whether it is for lack of exposure, I don't know. I don't want to speculate, but there's certainly a big group of people that are quite fearful of diversity, fearful of a change to the status quo. And maybe in the US context, are pinning some of what's happened in society, like the loss of manufacturing jobs and things like that, and looking for scapegoats. My life isn't the same as what my parents were. There's got to be a reason. It can't be me. So I think those are dynamics. And unfortunately, race has become something that people get quite worked up about and that motivates them to action. And it's developed this whole cottage industry. And I think a group of very powerful interests behind the scenes who can pump money into feeding the monster. Now, in that context, when you've got a country that historically, certainly from the First World, I believe, was seen as a white country, because that's certainly where the political power was. So they've sort of thought of South Africa as part of the First World and one of us. And now there's a majority black government. And you've got these narratives coming out about how horrible and awful it is to be a white person in South Africa, and how terrible the black people are abusing white people in South Africa. It just fits really nicely with the narrative that was there and with those fears that can be weaponized for other objectives and for other motives. But it's a partial view at best of what my life as a white Afrikaner in South Africa is. And that's the irritating thing for me, is that it's such a narrow, anemic, and often, in a lot of cases, just false portrayal of what I experience, and amazing privilege that I experience, the opportunities that remain open to me in the country. None of us are saying that South Africa is all moonshine and roses and it's wonderful. There's a lot broken about our country, and I think that the ANC has not done a great job. But to say that any part of that has been designed against me and that I am now suddenly at the bottom of the food chain and victimized is just so disconnected from reality. If you compare my quality of life and the average white person's quality of life across the country with the average black person across the country, whites are still almost universally, and we're all on a continuum, and there are a lot of people struggling in all groups. But if you just look at the aggregates and the averages, white people still have it very, very nice in this country. And so there's an element there of taking a very selective view, amplified by certain organizations, and then kind of weaponizing that just sits wrong.
You've actually touched on something that I wanted to ask you about, because I think it all comes down to our responsibility as active citizens, people that love this country. Is what do you think is the responsibility of, for instance, white Afrikaans leaders or organizations that are experiencing it? What do you think is their responsibility? Because, and this is just my personal view, I find the false narrative and rhetoric around this one group being victimized and the steady diet of fear mongering that is fed to that group, I find it dangerous because it isolates that group. Okay. So what eventually happens, and that is my optimistic view, is that the truth comes to the surface. And then even if you are experiencing problems, you are then excluded, from the bigger, because you were problematic and you were dishonest, and in a lot of cases, I think just very hurtful to our fellow South Africans in our actions. So what do you think is the responsibility of Afrikaner leaders and also organizations? And I say Afrikaner leaders loosely. I'm talking about people that have got platforms or organizations where they can reach out to others.
Yeah. Which doesn't mean that the platforms they're on are defined by the participation of Afrikaners. I mean, you can be a business leader in any company, but you are still an Afrikaner.
Yes.
So I'll talk just from my experience. I think it's so important that we lean in to learn and to understand first. We were fed a dialogue. I grew up in the 70s and 80s that was just false. And there's a lot that we need to unlearn. And that takes keeping your mouth closed and listening. it takes confronting some of the things on my side that are not very pretty. It takes understanding this notion of privilege. People get very worked up about the notion of privilege and then sort of fight against it. And I was probably in that category for quite some time. But for me now, I just have to acknowledge that when I walk into a room, whether it's a shop or a boardroom, because of what I look like, even today in 2025, I'm likely to be treated better than a black woman with the same qualifications. That's the reality, and many other sort of versions of that. So we've got to lean in, we've got to understand that. I don't feel that that's a disqualifier. I don't feel like it's a gun that people are holding to my head, but it is. It's a sort of bag of gifts that I got, and what I can do is I can choose how to use that. So that's really my mental picture, Bianca, is to say, with what I've received and with the understanding that I've got so far from doing the work and what I know that the learning that's still ahead of me, how can I use that to contribute? And if I look at where the need is in the country and where really there's problems to be solved, there's a lot in our country, mostly in the black communities rather than the white community, to be honest. And so wherever I go, whether it's through nonprofits, whether it's when I'm sitting on a board or in a day job, I just make sure that that's part of how I look at things. So the honesty of how I fit into the picture and trying to not go with these old school narratives of BE is stealing from me when it's actually just trying to create level playing fields. So the honesty, the self-reflection, and then to take that forward and really trying to look at the whole country and all of the issues when I'm solving problems and trying to, it's kind of one of my problems is when you define what I care about as only the Afrikaner issues, then surely our fellow South Africans must look at that and saying, these guys are just holding on to the old world. They're not really interested in solving anything. They want to just hold on to what they've got and not let go. And so when people like the EFF say that things haven't changed enough, the economy is untransformed and so on, I think there's more truth to that than we would like to believe. I think there's a lot of people doing amazing things that we also don't know about. But for me, it's a lot of what's needed is inside me, so that wherever I go, that's my point of departure, and how I can then lean into things and sometimes joke at my own expense, sometimes have aha moments where I'm learning something new and just be quite vulnerable to people. Say, Epis, I didn't think of it that way, I'm sorry. And then that's a hopeful moment to see an old toppy Afrikaner sort of admitting that he didn't know anything is probably quite refreshing. Yeah.
Even for me as a woman, it's quite refreshing.
Absolutely. Well, point taken. Point taken. I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, let's not go down that rabbit hole.
Can I
Okay.
give you a silly example? So
Yes.
we had this conversation at a team building of a company that I worked for, and we spoke about, I don't know, best and worst experiences in your life, that kind of thing, which is just what you sort of use to get people talking. And somebody spoke about a romantic candlelit dinner, and one of my black colleagues said that they spent their life studying by candlelight so that they would never need to see a candle again in their life.
Wow.
And yeah, just such a small thing where until you hear that, you just don't know, and you make assumptions and you hurt people and do things that yeah, really trigger them because of ignorance. And the more that we talk, the more we move towards each other, I think the more we just become more human to each other as well.
Absolutely. The one contentious topic is that, that white Afrikaners are a separate culture, and that is why issues like the Bala Bill are problematic, because it encourages room for others, making room for others, and that's why you need a separate university and a separate school, and I mean, we live in a country where we've even got entire town and other little areas.
Yeah.
I need to understand, as an English speaking South African, is what does being Afrikaans mean to you? Is, what does it mean that you have to protect your culture? What is your idea of you being Afrikaans? What's special to you about being Afrikaans?
Yeah, it's a great question. And if we had a bottle of wine, I think we could spend a couple of hours on it. But let me give you a short answer. I passionately identify as an Afrikaner. So for me, it's not an insult or something that I'm trying to get away from. I am an Afrikaner. Having said that, there's some music that I will never listen to, as I said earlier. But there's not going to be a weekend that I don't braai, and often I braai twice, and I love rugby, and there's some of the stereotypical things that I do like. But I think I've never felt like the label forces me to do anything. So it's an association from my side. And I think I certainly would like a lot of what is important to me to be protected into the future. I'd like my kids to also experience Koshuis rugby in Stellenbosch. My kids are now older, 25, 22, 19. So the billable is not one that I've deeply gone into, so I don't know what it is. But what I can say is, as much as there are things that my wife and I experience that I'd love for my kids to also get and to take forward, when my choice is for them to sit in class in Stellenbosch next to a Black South African that comes at things from a totally different place and is able to infuse into my kids' education that diversity of perspectives that enriches their learning and at the same time prepares them for the real world out there, then my desire for them to hold on to the Afrikaans bits gets relegated quite quickly down the priority list. Because it's not preparing them, in my view, for the real world. And in the end, that's what I want for my kids, is for them to really be prepared and to move towards the real world. So interestingly, all three of my kids chose the English stream in Stellenbosch from first year without talking to me about it. That was their choice. I think there's an element of sort of jargon and lingo, and I mean, to go and translate the whole first year maths book into terms that nobody understands because you've come up with it. There's a whole other story, but there's a lot about our culture. As a family, we only speak Afrikaans. That, in my mind, is not threatened at all by being open to people who are different from us, being open to how the world operates, leaning into things that are different to me and not seeing them as threatening. So I think there's something about that sort of openness. And I would hope, to answer your question, that English speaking and Black South Africans would find me someone that is also curious and willing to learn and willing to follow, which are things that you didn't see from white males in the past. And my experience is that that's a much more meaningful life and existence for me. When you're so anxious and fearful and trying to protect and hold on, it changes your world into a small and static and passive one. And that's not what I want for myself or for my kids. I want to live in an open world, a curious world, and a dynamic world. And that means that things need to change. I need to learn new things. I need to admit that I'm wrong as much as is necessary. Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm coming from. There have been parts I grew up in a different church to the mainstream Afrikaner, so I've had to deal with a small part of this from quite young, of not being quite the textbook Afrikaner. But I think more of that has been in the last 15 years. We were in Joburg for a long time at a church that is predominantly black, but socioeconomically quite homogenous. You didn't have rich white people and poor black people. You just had people, and they were of different races, and that was just the trend.
Okay, thank you. And then I think what I'm hearing from what you've said here is that the thing that plays a great role in where you stand individually is your need for growth. It sounds like that is you like growing, you like interacting, and you can actually engage with different ideas. And I think that probably makes you
Sorry, I'm interrupting you.
And that probably makes you a little bit more open to certain things, is your need for growth. That is just from my side. I facilitate training. Yeah. That's why.
Yeah. No, and I think you've got most of the blocks. The one part that I'll add is finding solutions and being part of creating solutions. And you got to use all of the pieces of the puzzle on the table if you're going to find solutions, to sort of say, well, I'm only going to use the blue pieces. It's just going to not lead to a very nice picture.
Absolutely. And then I have a final question for you, Andrew. And that is, if you were sitting in the Oval Office right now in the White House, and you were given the opportunity to speak to Donald Trump, what would you tell him about South Africa and about his current focus on a certain group?
Yeah. That is a very theoretical question, Bianca, because I'm not sure that listening is a very trained skill for him. I would tell my personal story. I would tell him the story of growing up in the 70s and 80s in apartheid South Africa, and my learning journey, and how the country has changed and how I have changed, and in that way try to give him my view of where we are today. But the point that I would be making is that he doesn't have, in my opinion, an accurate view of South Africa at the moment. We've got lots of challenges, but those challenges affect all of us. And like the Springboks are demonstrating so amazingly, if we work together with our different strengths and our different contributions and the diversity that we bring, that's how we're going to find the most amazing solutions and come up with new ideas that a sort of small subset would never have come up with. And the fear and of the unknown that some people still feel for that is what I will try to combat in the platforms that I have when I'm talking to, whether it be Donald Trump or Afrikaners, is the hopeful, curious excitement of stepping into the unknown rather than staying with the old way, which is known and it's kind of safe, but is not nearly as interesting.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrew. As he said, he would not listen, but I think that is a valuable approach for a lot of us. is actually to hear it from a white Afrikaans man. Is, because that is seen as, I must add, as an authority in certain groups. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to say thank you so much for your time, but I also, as a South African, want to say thank you for taking a stance. I know that it has not been easy. I've been seeing the background on what has been happening, the slander and the attacks and things like that. But it just takes a few brave voices to turn things around. And I'm so glad that this has started now. Thank you.
Great talking to you.
Anything you have to say to anyone? Just to end this all?
No, I think to the rest of South Africa, the non-Afrikaner South Africa, English-speaking South Africans, Black South Africans, I think there's a group of Afrikaners that's been quite silent. I think it's probably the majority that are quite different to the loud voice that you are hearing. And I hope that we will find more places where we can talk human to human rather than in the headlines on Twitter, which is just not very constructive.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.